Hello Avatar fans, my name is Avatar Ken, and today I'll be breaking down why although I did enjoy Azula in the Spirit Temple, I also found it a bit disappointing. Now before I get started, I ask that you please like, comment, and subscribe, and get ready for an undoubtedly controversial review. Now starting off my review, I'll be doing a brief overview of the plot of Azula in the Spirit Temple. This part will not contain my personal thoughts and critiques and will just serve as me explaining the story. Also, if you want to avoid spoilers, I recommend leaving right now. Let's get to the story. Azula and her new group of followers, the Fire Warriors, assault a granary somewhere in the Fire Islands. The whole thing turns out to be a setup by Ty Lee, who attempts to capture Azula and her warriors. During their battle, Ty Lee and some guards manage to capture one of the Fire Warriors, but instead of saving her, Azula leads a tactical retreat. The Fire Warriors, realizing that Azula will never change her selfish ambitions, decide to abandon her the next day, leaving Azula all alone within the forest. A big storm starts up, and Azula stumbles upon an ominous temple while attempting to find shelter, and upon her first steps inside, she is greeted by an elderly innkeeper. The innkeeper is kind to Azula, offering her food and a warm bed to rest on, but Azula refuses and asserts that she deserves the private quarters of the innkeeper. After resting for a while, Azula is awakened by two familiar voices that reveal themselves to be Lo and Lee, Azula's former mentors. Lo and Lee lead Azula out onto a bright and sunny Ember Island beach, where she is greeted by the happy, smiling faces of her royal family. They all congratulate her on her past achievements, and her mother, Ursa, embraces her and tells her that she is proud of her. Just as Azula's gotten comfortable with her new idyllic life, another familiar voice calls from across the beach that none of this is real and it never could have happened. The voice turns out to be May, who is accompanied by Ty Lee, who joins in and asserts that Ursa would never be proud of Azula. Azula reacts with anger and denial before awakening once again to be greeted by the new. Azula dismisses her concerns and storms out of the building, only to realize that everything but the temple has dissipated into mist. Azula storms back into the building to confront the innkeeper, only to be greeted by visions and memories of her family from the past. As this is happening, the innkeeper transforms into a feral beast, and Azula attempts to attack her. In the midst of their battle, Ty Lee and May appear and attack Azula's insecurities and mindset. Next, Ursa and Zuko show up to continue the mental attack against Azula, only for Azula to lash out, destroying the monstrously deformed versions of her family until only the insect-like manifestation of a spirit appears before her. The spirit reveals that it manifested Azula's internal demons in an attempt to make Azula confront them and redeem herself. Azula rejects the efforts of the spirit, and in one final decisive lightning blast, appears to destroy the spirit for good. Azula returns to the physical world and rejoices that none of the nightmarish trials she went through seem to have been real. She finds the encampment of the Fire Warriors nearby, who have managed to save their lost friend. Azula scoffs at their weakness, yet she decides to leave them alone, vowing to find more followers as she always does. So I'm betting a lot of you guys are wondering what I could possibly have against Azula in the Spirit Temple. Well, 1. The gap. The last time Azula's plot was progressing at all in any way in the Avatar universe was way back in 2015 in the Smoke and Shadow trilogy. I don't think anyone here can argue that that isn't an absurd time to wait for anything. And you gotta remember that Smoke and Shadow was a full trilogy of comics. Azula in the Spirit Temple is 80 pages soaking wet, and while the writing was admittedly on point, I don't feel like Azula progressed that much at all outside of that one moment at the end. I understand if people feel like this isn't really the comic's fault, because the Avatar creative team is pretty notorious for being inconsistent at this point. But I really don't feel like 80 pages of Azula essentially talking to herself makes up for that 8-year gap, and the future for Azula isn't very clear as of now. 2. Azula's character. I might catch some flack for this, but I really don't feel like this comic explores Azula's character in an interesting way. Sure, she has all the interactions that all of us fans want to see, but you gotta remember that these are all visions and manifestations. It's all happening essentially in Azula's head, so we can't really take any of it seriously because the real characters aren't actually there interacting with Azula in a genuine way. At least with The Search and Smoking Shadow, regardless of what you thought about what they did with Azula's character, all of the interactions she had with Zuko and Ursa and Mei and Ty Lee actually happened in real time and changed the dynamic she had with them, and vice versa. For example, take Azula's reactions with her mother from The Search and compare them to the ones from this comic, and you'll see what I mean. In The Search, the things and the actions that each character said and did actually affected their dynamic and their mindset. In Azula in the Spirit Temple, I guess you could say that Azula was affected in the end, but even if she was, there's still a real conversation that should and will probably take place between Azula and her mother in the future. So why do I care about Azula's biased manifestation version? 3. Implications for the future. So even if you absolutely love this comic book, see absolutely no flaws with it, and absolutely hate my guts for criticizing it so much, I have one good question for you. Where's all of this going? Sure, there's some development implied by the fact that Azula didn't go after the Fire Warriors in the end, but all she says is that she'll just make a new group of ladies that torment Zuko. This comic kind of offers next to no plan or change for Azula going into the future. So how am I supposed to feel hyped about this character? Is this just what Azula's gonna do from now on? If not, why not offer any new development for her at all? I can confidently say that after reading this comic, that Azula's future is still very uncertain and definitely not in an interesting way. I generally did enjoy this comic because Azula is actually my favorite character, but it does sort of come off as a waste of time. Now I'll leave you with one more question. If Azula were to get a new, proper comic arc in the future, I want you to ask yourself if you'd ever have a reason to pick up this comic ever again. I did enjoy Azula in the Spirit Temple, but I am also pretty disappointed by it. It does very well come across as more style than substance, and I don't feel like it's left Azula in the most flattering position going forward into the future. Please remember that this is just my opinion, and you can feel comfortable to completely disagree with any and everything that I just said. Thank you for watching, and remember to please like, comment, and subscribe for a bright future of Avatar content.